Good afternoon, everybody. It's Tuesday afternoon. It's just about 3 o'clock, and outside we're experiencing some very, very nasty weather on top of the very nasty pandemic that we're trying to survive here. I hope everybody's doing well. I think we had a very nice Zoom meeting on Friday, and yesterday I was very encouraged by the number of participants in the discussion board that I marked as for a participation grade, and writing number 4. Okay, and some people did take the opportunity to catch up, and the opportunity still exists. If you're just reemerging from things, or maybe you're now finding some time and attention that you can give to the course, to school, and to things other than the virus and all the nastiness that's attended to that. You can come on board, okay? Jump in, catch up. I will grant you that time because I think I can afford to. I think CUNY and Kingsborough and our department, the history department, has given us the signal that we be accommodating as possible, and I'm fully in agreement with that. But in any case, again, good afternoon. I hope I'm plugged in the right. I'm sorry. Let me just see. I'm testing 1, 2. No, I think it's this one. All right. Testing. Should have done this before I started. Anyway, again, welcome. I want to correct one small point. I probably made a lot more mistakes than this, but this one I did check myself on, and small point, but an interesting point, and one that I want to make sure I corrected. The city of Boston, while being a provincial city in colonial America, John Adams talks about his journeys to New York and to Philadelphia, and New York in particular he found to be in the 1760s and 1770s to be a much more cosmopolitan town, and Boston being much more provincial. And of course Philadelphia, I believe, population-wise, was the most populous city in colonial America, British colonial America. But I did say that Philadelphia had the first fire department. That is incorrect. Boston, as early as, get this, 1653, the first engine pump is put into place, and the Boston Fire Department begins. You did see that apparatus, that pump wagon that they were dragging down the street in the snowstorm in 1770 for the what becomes the Boston Massacre. They think originally that there's a call for fire, but Boston is the first city to have a fire department, an organized fire department, and the first ones to pay people to be firefighters. And that year is 1678. The first paid firefighters are in Boston. I did tell you that Benjamin Franklin gets the credit. His picture is all over Philadelphia, at least on firehouses. One of the symbols for the Philadelphia Fire Department is a profile of Benjamin Franklin with a fireman's helmet on. Okay, and Benjamin Franklin's bucket brigade was formed in 1736, certainly a long time after Boston. But it caught the eye of a lot of people around the different colonies, the story of Ben Franklin's Bucket Brigade, so that made fire departments much more popular. Anyway, wanted to correct that, and kind of got into the weeds on that, and I apologize. But what I want to do here and now, and then in the next couple of mini lectures, I want to talk about first. We're talking about a time period of, let's say, looking at a timeline of 20 years. Okay, 1770 to 1790. Okay, 1770 to 1790. And actually, 1770 to 1785. We could even do that. Let's do that. Let's back it up. 15 years. 1770. We're talking about the time of the Boston Massacre. Okay, and we'll stop. Basically, we're going to stop at 1783 because that is the technical end of the American Revolution, and the Treaty of Paris that is signed between the British and now the newly formed United States of America. A lot to talk about in between 1770 and 1785, obviously. Okay, and it's very, very interesting history, and just a very interesting story. Anyway, we talked about the Boston Massacre. Okay, in episode 1 of John Adams, we start off with the Boston Massacre, 1770 March. Okay, and we see Massachusetts leading the way. The Bostonians and the Massachusettsans, I guess, are very much in the vanguard. They're the ones that are importing and exporting. They're doing all the shipping and the trading. I shouldn't say all of it, but they're doing a lot of the shipping and trading. Okay, and they are being affected greatly by all the various taxes and duties and tariffs that are being put on the goods going in and coming, going out and coming in from the ports of Boston and throughout the colonies. And you find a couple of names that are prominent. Okay, 2 names. I'll give you 3 actually. One name is Samuel Adams. Okay, he was making beer back then, I guess, but he was making predominantly he's making money. Okay, and how was he making his money? By smuggling, the black market. Okay, and bootlegging. A lot of different products. Okay, another name heavily involved in bootlegging or the black market or smuggling was your favorite insurance company, John Hancock. Okay, and a third name whose name would I guess be tarnished in some ways. I hate to do this. Paul Revere was prominent in New England as a silversmith. Okay, but his reputation, I guess, is somewhat tarnished as a silversmith. He's tarnished by the fact that he too was making a boatload of money by buying and selling boatloads of goods that were not adhering to the different taxes. Okay, so it's a sore subject. It's a tough subject to talk about because the New Englanders in particular thought they should be free of these British taxes, and you know that things get violent in the protesting. You saw again the Boston Massacre, which was not a massacre. Okay, it was a legitimate self-defense by the British troops who were being attacked by the Sons of Liberty. Okay, we talked about the John Hancock's ship that the Boston British Revenue were stopped and would had would was going to impose the tax, and the revenue or the tax collector. You see in John Adams episode 1, you see him literally being tarred and feathered, which is a barbaric, violent act. There's nothing funny about the fact that a man is covered, a human being is covered in hot molten tar, and then which would certainly would kill the person, and then throwing feathers all over them, so that for weeks and months he is literally he's tarred with public shame. Okay, people will know. Well, that there's that. You can tell the tar and the feathers still are on his body if he lives. And he walks around with that mark on him. Anyway, the Boston Tea Party really has repercussions with the British government and the Crown, and the Boston Tea Party, where again Samuel Adams and John Hancock and a bunch of Sons of Liberty dress as Native Americans and throw and literally destroy 11,000 British pounds sterling worth of tea, and they destroy it and they throw it in the Boston Harbor. They call it the Boston Tea Party. Well, in retaliation to that act of terrorism, the British government Parliament passes the Intolerable Acts in 1774, or also referred to as the Coercive Acts. The port of Boston is closed until the tea is paid for. Again, 11,000 pounds sterling, which is the British currency, had to be paid back before the port of Boston would be open, and Boston Harbor would be open again. The democratic procedure known as the town meeting in New England, they were shut down. Okay, and if anybody were after that point, we saw in 1770 the soldiers being tried in a Boston criminal court. That was not going to happen after the Boston Tea Party. Any British official that was to be tried, they would be tried, or anybody committing crimes in the colonies would then be shipped over to Great Britain and tried in courts, either criminal courts or, in some cases, military in court-martial. They would be court-martialed. They would be tried in military courts, and even if they were civilians. An infringement upon the rights of Englishmen and women. Okay, but the King and Parliament didn't seem to want to care much about that. The Quebec Act seemed to be a thumb in the eye of, as the expression goes, or just thumbing the King and Parliament thumbing their nose at the British colonists by giving French Canadian American colonists rights that while they're taking away British American rights, they are giving French Americans their rights to worship in Catholic churches, and restored French Civil War and French courts, and extended Quebec's boundaries to Ohio and Mississippi. This is certainly something that, again, just to really tweak the British colonists in the time when things are getting nasty. We see at the end of episode 1 of John Adams, we see John Adams taking the podium, standing in the pulpit, and his eyes have been opened. He was a man who firmly had his feet in the British camp. He lived in Boston. He saw exactly what was happening, but he was not a radical. He did not have the benefit of a silk purse. Basically, he wasn't rich and an idol like his cousin Samuel to to afford himself to be a revolutionary radical. But by the end of episode one, his eyes are opened and he sees just how much of the British are willing to infringe upon the rights of British American colonists, and he starts to come over to the Sons of Liberty's side. We see him take the pulpit and call for liberty, okay? And he is elected. He makes the speech at the end of the episode as he's being elected to be a delegate to the First Continental Congress, September 1774, to be held in none other than Philadelphia, okay? Everybody except the colony of Georgia sends representatives. They pledge to not obey the coercive acts. They beat back the idea. They're not meeting to call for independence. They are loyal British subjects. God save the king. Okay, God save the king. But at the same time, they declare that their rights should be adhered to. They promise obedience to the king, but they reject the right of Parliament to tax them. Okay, they set up the Continental Association to prohibit importation of goods from England. Okay, the British Crown was going to hurt them in their pocketbooks, and they in turn were going to boycott and make sure that nothing English got into the colonies. And they adjourned again, and they vowed to they adjourned, and they vowed to meet again in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress, and that's May 1775. Okay. However, as the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem tells us, it's the 18th of April in 75. Okay, it's the midnight ride of Paul Revere. He gives us the date, 18th of April, because the 19th of April, as we talked about last time, the 19th of April is going to be the shots heard round the world. Okay, the battles of Lexington and Concord, where on 19th of April 1775, the first shots of the American Revolution are fired. And again, this revolution is not a revolution calling for independence, but they're trying to force the British to recognize that British Americans are British, but they should be treated differently than other British subjects. The Minutemen, as they are known, these are citizen soldiers like we have today, our National Guard, our militia. These were militiamen. They were farmers, they were merchants, they shopkeepers, and the like. And they would keep their musket in the corner. They would grab it if the call was to call to arm. To arms, to arms, the British are coming. Paul Revere and others, by the way. The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere is more myth than it is actual fact. The redcoats that were marching and engaging with the militia, they were beaten back, and the militiamen pursued them all the way back to Boston. Lexington and Concord, 300 British soldiers were injured, and 95 Americans were killed in those battles. In May, it's May of 1775 now, a month later, and the Second Continental Congress convenes in Philadelphia, May 10th, 1775. We're not talking about revolution. We are talking about revolution, but we're not talking about independence. We are talking about revolution, but not independence. The Second Continental Congress gets down to business, and a sign of astute politics, a man named John Adams, who we know proposes that a Virginian should be the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, what would be the colonial army, and that is going to be that Virginian is Colonel George Washington. He's been sitting all the time as a delegate from Virginia in Philadelphia, sitting in the assembly with his colonel's uniform on. He's auditioning for the part. Adams knows this, and to attract the side of the Virginians towards the idea of independence, Washington is made commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Okay, Congress authorizes a navy. Okay, we have George Washington as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and also there's going to be a United States Navy of some sorts. Okay, and also Congress is going to authorize the printing of paper currency, okay, continental dollars. But again, not talking about independence. In June, the Battle of Bunker Hill takes place, okay, and it's the it becomes the bloodiest battle of the entire American Revolution. The Patriot armies suffer a major defeat. The colonists are defeated when they run out of ammunition. However, it's a complete shock to the British forces. The Redcoats, while they do realize that they won this battle of Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill actually, it takes place more on Breed's Hill, adjacent to Bunker Hill. While the Redcoats won, technically, they realized that, wow, they really took a beating at the same time. And there were high casualties on both sides. But it becomes then a moral victory for the Continental Forces, the militia, and a moral victory for the American Revolution. And the fact is that the British then now control the city of Boston completely with armed forces. The expression "don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." This is because that's the call that went out to the militia forces. They didn't have enough ammunition, so they were going to have to wait until the Redcoats were right in front of them before they fired their rounds. Okay, so this is the time now. Okay, the Second Continental Congress will be of two minds. They will adopt the Declaration of the Causes and Necessities of Taking Up Arms, okay, which is declaring the discontent of the colonists with British rule, but at the same time they're going to send what is called an olive branch, the olive branch petition. They're basically begging the king at the same time for reconciliation. But England is going to ignore and reject the olive branch petition. England will declare the colonies to be in rebellion, and this is where King George III goes to Parliament and asks for 20,000 troops to be Army and Navy, Marines to be sent to America to put down this rebellion, to quell this rebellion, and Parliament signs off on this and gives the king what he's asking for. Again, this is democracy. Okay, this is representative democracy in action here. Parliament draws up a bill, an act, a law at the king's request, and those troops are going to make their way across the Atlantic Ocean and make their way right into New York Harbor, bivouacking on Staten Island, and in the summer of 1776, which we'll talk about next, They are going to. There's going to be the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, Battle of Long Island, Battle of Manhattan, and the route and the evacuation across the Hudson River into New Jersey, and we'll talk about that more from there. So what we're going to see is coming up next is going to be the Second Continental Congress, and in particular, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, the Declaration of Independence. Okay? We'll see you next. Stay tuned.